So I'd like to talk to you about watermelons, but more specifically watermelon seeds and the abuse that they have received over the last few decades. When I was a kid, summer was filled with cookouts, and every cookout seemed to end with watermelon. And of course, when you're a kid and you're eating watermelon, what do people tell you? Don't swallow the seeds. If you swallow the seeds, you'll grow a watermelon in your belly. I may have swallowed a few of those seeds. And even though we know the seeds aren't that bad for you, in reality, you tend to avoid them, right? So my brother and I, we'd take a bite of watermelon and then we'd spit the seeds out. Or we had this little game where we would pick the seeds out ahead of time, and they're kind of slippery. And we'd squeeze them between our fingers, and they'd go shooting off in this random direction at a pretty high speed. And all summer long, we'd have watermelon, and we'd sit and we'd shoot watermelon seeds all over our backyard. And I don't know how many seeds there were back there, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, but there was a lot of seeds, a lot of watermelon, a lot of seeds. And I'd wake up in the morning as a little kid, and I'd look out the window and I'd think, where are all the watermelons? I would look out there and I'd think, all these watermelon seeds in my backyard, they've got to start sprouting, and by the end of the summer, we'll have like hundreds of watermelons, right? But it was always so very disappointing because in all those years, not one watermelon sprouted in the backyard. Where are all the watermelons? So I want you to hold that thought for a minute. I'm going to digress. Every year in the United States, about 3.3 million high school students graduate high school. And about 70% of them go off to college of some form. And if you think about the journey from childhood to graduation in high school, we'd always begin sort of at this early age in childhood where we're carefree, running through, dandelion-filled fields with your friends, not a care in the world, just learning about yourself and your abilities and your interests, trying things and exploring and inventing. Now, if I ask high school students today if that's the childhood they had, chances are they'd say probably not. If you think about your childhood, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, most kids would say it was fun, but it was full of a lot of directed activity. There were play dates. There was a lot of sports, but they were organized. There were book clubs. There were tutoring programs before school and after school. And on the weekends, there was Greek school or Chinese school, as my friend Kevin talked about earlier today, right? So you were full with a lot of directed activity. And all of that was to kind of get you ready for young adulthood. And you get to high school, and it's almost like you put that all on steroids, because now it counts. Now it's community service, and it's honors classes and AP classes, and it's all about building a resume to get into the right college, to get into the best college, to prepare yourself for the right career. And you apply to colleges, and I know that there are high school students that I know that have applied to 12, 13, 14, sometimes 15 different colleges. And as a little game, I'll ask them, what colleges have you applied to? They get to about 8 or 9, and then they just forget the rest. All these colleges, all these schools, all this money on application fees. Then you get to college, and you spend 4 years in college preparing yourself for a job. It's all about more community service, studying abroad, doing all these projects, positioning yourself, getting a right internship, and figuring out what it is you want to do when you graduate. And about less than 2/3 of people who enter college actually graduate from college with a degree. So we're already starting to kind of lose, some folks along the way. And then you graduate, and you burst into the work world. And a few years into it, dissatisfaction sets in. There's lots of different studies about this, but people in their 20s, anywhere from 60 to 80% of them are dissatisfied with the career they chose. They're unhappy. They wish they could go back and do something different. And it's not just people in their 20s. When you look at people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, across the whole spectrum of age, what you find is that most people are pretty dissatisfied with their careers. The Gallup organization did a study, and they found that they actually looked at 140 different countries. They looked at workers, and they surveyed thousands of workers in each one of these countries, and they found that about 63% of people in the world are not engaged and unmotivated by their jobs. Only about 13% are actually engaged and satisfied with the career that they have. The rest, 24%, are actively disengaged. That sounds scary to me. I don't want to be around anyone who's actively disengaged. I'm not sure what they do to you, but it's not going to be good, right? So why is this? Why have we arrived at a point where we've spent all this time and all this effort and all this directed activity to get to a point where pretty much most of us are unhappy with our careers, especially early on? Where are all the happy workers? Where are all the watermelons? I think the answer to those two questions is the same. It's external pressure and it's loss of control. If you think about my brother and I squeezing those watermelon seeds, that's a lot of external pressure, and that watermelon seed might make a really long flight, but it has an abrupt landing and typically not landing someplace that's conducive to growth. And people have the same kind of flight through life sometimes. We're busy in middle school, we're busy in high school, we're busy in college, and then we're busy in our career. And we're so busy getting there that we don't often stop long enough to figure out where it is we want to land. And so it's loss of control in some extent too, right? Because a watermelon seed can't tell you where it wants to land. And very often people don't know where they want to go. And there's some data that backs up why this happens, especially more lately than 50 years ago. If you look at how much free time children have today versus 50 years ago, and how much independence children have today versus 50 years ago, what you find is some dramatic numbers. In 1970, for example, 80% of third graders walked to school and walked home alone in the United States. Today, that number is less than 5%. If you look at the 1960s and the 1970s and how much free time, how much unstructured time children have, there is 12 hours less free time in the week than there was in the 1970s for children, which means there's about 25% less playtime and 50% less unstructured time. That in itself is maybe telling in terms of how we've kind of changed our society a bit over the last 50 years. But something else is happening in parallel to this, and that is our locus of control is changing dramatically. The locus of control is basically how you feel about the results in your life. Do you feel you control where you're headed and the results in your life, or do you feel external forces control you and kind of bring you to where you are in life? So if you have an internal locus of control and you do poorly on one of my exams, you'll blame yourself. You'll say, I didn't study long enough, I didn't go through the study guide, I could have gone and got some extra help before the exam. If you have an external locus of control, you'll say, well, Pouliopoulos put together a really hard exam, I can't stand that guy, and my number 2 pencil broke halfway through it. There's a big difference in how you view the world, externally or internally. Studies have shown that if you have an internal locus of control, you are generally happier and more satisfied in your career, you're healthier, and you're much more active in your community. Over the last 50 years, our focus on internal versus external control, external locus of control, has changed dramatically. When you look at the numbers, what you find is that today's college student is more externally focused, has a greater external locus of control than 80% of college students in the 1960s. In other words, we've gone from a time in the 1960s where most college students felt that they had complete control over their future, to a point now where most college students feel like their future is really controlled quite a bit by external forces. What happens when you get to this point is that an externally focused individual is always sort of seeking approval and motivated more by rewards, whereas an internally motivated person is more often motivated by sort of self-reliance and a self-awareness of what they're good at and what they like to do. So we've really kind of switched the aspect of life in terms of how we like to view the world around us. Now, this has some implications that are, quite frankly, tragic. When people feel with an external locus of control, you feel that you don't have a say in the fate in your life. You don't feel like you control your life, and therefore, you begin to feel anxious and depressed. In the last 50 years, clinical diagnosis of anxiety and depression has risen about 700% amongst children 15 years old and younger. And an even more tragic piece of data is that the suicide rate for children 15 years and younger has quadrupled in the last 50 years. And the suicide rate for children 15 years to 25 years old has doubled in the last 50 years. Those are awful statistics. And I'm not saying that because we've structured our children's time and we've taken away some of their independence that that's the cause, but it's a related factor. And so, those of you in the audience that are in college or newly graduated from college, I know you're thinking, well, what's the point? I don't want you to have a sense of dread about this. What I want you to understand is you personally, today, can change your locus of control by just taking a few steps. Inside each of us is the seeds of greatness, right? Every kid that's born has something that they're born to do in this world. Everyone in this room, no matter what your age is, you have a purpose. You have a reason to be here. Your job is to find it. We've spent 50 years kind of changing our locus of control. I want you just to spend 50 minutes thinking about how you can change your locus of control going forward. The thing that you have to keep in mind is that external pressure is always going to be there. Always. Your parents, your guidance counselors, your advisors, your professors, your peers, there's always going to be external pressure to tell you what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. The only way to counter external pressure like that is to develop internal pressure, internal confidence. And part of that comes from truly understanding yourself, what you're good at and what you like being good at, and gaining the confidence and the self-awareness to go out and do it. So it starts with a very subtle shift in the way we ask questions. When you're growing up, people are always asking you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you get the standard answers, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an accountant. Nobody ever says they want to be an accountant. But I throw that in because there's a lot of accountants here at Bentley. But when you ask someone what they want to be, they're just kind of picturing in their mind the role that someone plays in that with that title. If you want to be a doctor, you have to step back and ask yourself, are you good at the things that it requires you to be good at, to become a doctor? And do you like doing those things? Do you like going to school for like 15 years and working 24/7 for 2 years and getting a residency and then board certification? And all? Do you like all that stuff? If you do, yeah, you should be a doctor. But what you need to do is start with the question of what do you want to do? And what are you good at doing that you enjoy doing? And if you start there, then you fit yourself into the role that best fits you. And you got to follow the clues. So one quick example, when I call myself a recovering engineer. I have 2 engineering degrees, and I felt the watermelon squeeze. I went into engineering because I was good at math and science, and everyone said, you should be an engineer. And 3-4 years after graduation, I decided, no, I shouldn't. I didn't like it. I was good at it, but I didn't like being good at it. The one thing that I think impacted me most in college as an undergrad was I had the opportunity to teach physics at a high school as one of my projects. And I loved that. That was, to me, the best thing I did in 4 years of college. I looked forward to putting together the lesson plans. I looked forward to getting in front of the class. I looked forward to coming up with clever ways to make ideas resonate with my students. I loved it even more when a few years later, one of my students told me that she became an engineer because she enjoyed physics so much in my class. I don't know if she had the quarter-life crisis, though, at the age of 25. But it was so touching to me to have that experience. But I ignored that clue. I got back into engineering and finished up my degrees and kept going along that path. That was the plan. It took me about 20 years before I realized I need to be teaching. And that's what I do. I like to teach. I like to educate. And I like being good at it, and I like continually working that craft. You've got to find your garden. Do you know that a seed doesn't need soil to grow? A seed needs soil to keep seed eaters away. You got to plant the seed in the ground so that birds don't eat it. This is the same thing with you and your career. You've got to find an environment that supports you and your passions and your dreams so that the dream eaters or the dream killers don't come and take it away from you. So in practical terms, what that means is go find people that like doing the things you like doing and hang out with them. In this hyper-connected world, there's no excuse for you not to find a group of people that you enjoy being with and talking about the stuff that you all get excited about. And in another practical term, when you're touring a college or looking at an employer for a potential job, get off the guided tour right? They're going to give you a great scripted tour of the campus. They're going to give you a great scripted tour of the school. They're going to give you a great scripted tour of the company. Ask them if you can spend 3 or 4 hours sitting in the cafeteria and listening to the conversations around you. Is this your tribe? Are these the people that you can hang out with that will protect your dream? Find your patch in the garden. Find that group of people that can support you. Second, absorb, don't drown. Absorb knowledge. When a seed absorbs water, it absorbs the right nutrients it needs to become, to initiate the processes of germination. The kinds of knowledge that you can absorb and inside of you will also initiate your creativity and your energy. The question you can ask yourself about this is, what do you read when someone's not telling you what to read? Right? So what book do you pick up? What website, what blog do you read? Because you're interested in it, because it engages you and it excites you and it builds your self-esteem. That should be a clue that area is an area that you might want to think about working in. And don't drown, right? When you get to the point where you feel the information is overwhelming and it doesn't quite align with your goals, it's time to get out. That happened to me when I was getting my master's degree, and I got my last class, and I had a midterm, and the instructor passed back the midterm exam. I looked down. I needed a B in this class to get my degree, and the number was 81, and I was ecstatic because I had worked really hard, and this was really complicated stuff, until I turned the paper around, and I realized I'd gotten an 18. At that point, I felt stupid. I felt embarrassed. I felt I was drowning in a sea of information that I just couldn't internalize. I was overwhelmed, and that was really at that point I started thinking, I got to get out of this business. Bask, don't bake. The sunlight for a seed gives it energy. When a seed germinates and it bursts through the ground, it gets energy from the sun. Ask yourself, what are the achievements that I have had? What are the accomplishments that I have done that I personally feel best about? Not the stuff that your parents or your peers or your friends or your professors tell you, good job, congratulations. What are the things you've done that you feel internally gives you kind of that warmth of energy? That's the kind of thing that you should be focused on trying to find in a job, in a career. When you're in a situation that's not supportive and you're doing things and you're not meeting other people's expectations, that sunlight turns kind of into a heat lamp. It dries up the seed before it has a chance to grow. So avoid those situations and find some place where you can kind of bask in your own glory and bask in the knowledge that you're getting better and mastering a new skill or a new knowledge. You know, at the end of the day, people think, you know, there's this myth, right? If I just succeed, I'll be happy. And we've heard a lot about this today. Happiness precedes success. So what I want you to do is think about, what are the things that make you happy? What problems do you want to solve? What kind of people do you want to work with? What kind of knowledge do you want to absorb? Where's your patch in the garden? You know, what gives you the heat and the warmth to continue? Change your mindset. Take the moment in the next 24 hours and think about, how can I begin to shift the focus from an external locus of control to an internal locus of control? How do I begin to understand that the decisions I make moving forward are the ones that will change my life forever? And if we can all kind of adapt that mindset, I think there'll be lots of happy workers and plenty of backyards full of watermelons. Thank you.